Welcome back to a timeline of COVID. My name is Adlih, and today I have Alex as my co-host, and we are going to be discussing post-COVID experiences and more specifically the effect of sepsis on some patients with a specific gene variant. So, Alex, have you heard of sepsis before?
I haven't actually. I'm familiar with the term COVID long haulers, if that applies here.
Actually, funny you bring that up. Being either a COVID long hauler or post sepsis has been debated for a while now. But before I derail any further, I'll give you a definition of sepsis so we can both be on the same page. According to Mayo Clinic, sepsis is a life-threatening complication of an infection.
Yes, I'm finding here from Mayo Clinic as well that sepsis occurs when your body reacts to an infection, but causes bodily inflammation that causes serious harm and extreme risk to the person. Basically, what I'm understanding is that sepsis is where the processes that fight infection decide to turn on your body.
Yes, exactly. It's that idea that your body sort of malfunctions and turns on itself that causes severe problems.
Understandably so. Now, connecting this to COVID-19, where do the two conditions overlap?
Well, I was reading this article from BioMu on this exact topic, and I felt they did a really good job explaining this. They said, quote, COVID-19 and sepsis go hand in hand for COVID-19 patients who are hospitalized in the ICU. For seriously ill, COVID-19 is much more than a respiratory infection. SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, can impact multiple organs, not just the respiratory tract. This multi-organ dysfunction is essentially the definition of sepsis, end quote. This statement makes drawing the lines between COVID-19 and sepsis pretty clear. Sepsis, from what we defined already, is a bodily response to an infection, in a sense. Now, patients that are hospitalized with COVID-19 suffer more prominent and intense infection, and so sepsis can become more prevalent.
I see the overlap. You're right that the quote does make things very clear. It's not so much that you get sepsis or that post-COVID is sepsis, but it's more that your body reacts poorly to COVID-19, making it so you suffer through sepsis conditions.
Yes, exactly. And on sepsis conditions, you have a list of the main symptoms of sepsis, right?
Yes, I do. The main symptoms of sepsis from Medline Plus are shortness of breath, confusion or disorientation, extreme pain, fever, shivering or feeling cold, and clammy or sweaty skin.
Now, all of those symptoms sound quite a bit like COVID symptoms. And so here's where you get the COVID long haulers versus post-sepsis debate that I mentioned earlier. Though we're not really here to discuss this question, it is interesting to think that all these people that have suffered immensely from COVID-19, having symptoms long after the virus has left their system, have been suffering from a sepsis-related attack.
That is really interesting. Though you mentioned that we weren't here to discuss this, that's a really good segue into our topic today.
Great point, yeah.
Now that we have a pretty decent fundamental understanding of sepsis and COVID, and they seemingly work together hand in hand when discussing long hauler COVID patients, we want to take a closer look at the specific gene variant that promoted sepsis in COVID patients.
That's right. We found this information in Penn Medicine News, and the information will be linked in the podcast description, as we highly recommend anyone listening read the article. It's got a lot of important information.
Okay, so Alec, do you want to start us with the definition of gene variation and how does that work?
Yeah, of course. Firstly, I was going to describe genetic variation and then I'll describe gene variation.
Good idea.
Okay, so genetic variation is the discrepancy in DNA among individuals or the discrepancy in DNA within a population. And this discrepancy is due to mutations and genetic recombination, which is just different orientations you can get with chromosomes lining up at the metaphase plate. But gene variation, as described by Medline Plus, is a permanent change in the DNA sequence that makes up a gene. So basically, genetic variation is gene variation on a larger scale, if that makes sense.
Can you give us a few examples of some neutral, with respect to fitness, gene variants for a better understanding?
Yeah, you could take eye color, for example. Everyone's different eye colors are a result of a specific gene variant that causes genetic variation in a population, though that's a very common variation in people's DNA.
Yeah, that's a good example, showing that not all gene variants are beneficial or negative.
Exactly, though the gene variant we're going to be discussing today is a negative variant with respect to fitness, meaning that the variation negatively impacts a person's life.
Yeah, the gene variant that we're talking about today are variations in the APOL1 gene, an innate immunity gene involved in the defense against pathogens.
Yeah, so now the variations in this gene are not all bad, though. In many people of West African descent, two variations of this gene can be found. So one variation leads to resistance against African sleeping sickness, while the second variation increases one's risk of chronic kidney disease and other COVID and HIV-related kidney diseases.
Now, the interesting thing is that the second variation can be found more predominantly in Black individuals, and the same gene variant increases the chances of sepsis post-COVID.
Yeah, Penn Medicine ran a study to look at the effects and correlation of sepsis and this gene variant and tested mice carrying the second variant versus mice not carrying the variant to see how they reacted and whether they received sepsis.
This test with mice also ran alongside another data collection of COVID results and sepsis cases among Black individuals, which ended up showing that Black people have 67% higher chance of getting sepsis and 20% higher chance of dying from it when compared to white individuals.
Those statistics are insane. The fact that one simple variation in a gene can impact so much is really insane.
Yeah, it really is insane.
Well, that wraps up our information for today. It also wraps up our series, A Timeline of COVID. We hope you enjoyed these podcasts and learned something new and important.